Okay, so first day in Calcutta, well, first full day in Calcutta rundown. So this morning, I should probably start with getting off the plane because I had sort of the worst case Indian scenario. Not worst case, it could be a lot worse. There's a whole lot of things going on right now that could be a lot worse, so I don't mean that exactly, but getting off the plane where I prepaid for my cab. I told the guy my hotel address. I tried to give him my voucher so he could see the address. Of course, he decided not to look at my voucher. So he put on the thing whatever he put on the thing, and then I took it out to the cab drivers. And there of course is this kid out there who targets me because I'm blonde. He's like, miss, and I'm like, fuck, not again. So I was trying to kind of ignore him and not have to deal with that. And then, but he followed me anyway to my cab, or he walked in front of me because he saw the guy hand me the slip and saw which cab it was. So he walks in front of me, and then as I'm trying to reach for the door to the cab, he grabs my backpack out of my hand and throws it in the cab. And I'm like, oh crap, well at least he put it in the cab, right? At least he didn't run off with it. So I was like, well, I'm going to counteract this because I don't want him to ask me for any money. So I just gave him 10 rupees and was like, okay, which 10 rupees is actually really generous for what just happened, especially considering that I didn't want this kid's help or ask for it. And he clearly wasn't helping anyone else. It was clearly oh, great, a stupid Westerner. So then I get in the cab and I'm trying to tell the cab driver where I'm going, and I keep showing him the address of my actual hotel, but he's ignoring it. And I put it in his hands. I have him read it. He's ignoring it. He's using he even hands me back the slip that the cab guy gave him. So I'm like, how does he have any clue where he's going? Of course, he takes me to a hotel that's not my hotel. And I was like, nay, this is not my hotel. And he then, is asking people, and everybody's like, oh, I don't know how to get to this place or this hotel. And it clearly says on the directions to my hotel, AJC Road, which is a huge road here, and Park Street, which is another very famous Calcutta road. So these are two huge roads, and this hotel is massive and brightly lit. You cannot miss it from the street. So it's very techno looking. It's got big circles with pulsing lights on the side. So I'm I cannot imagine why this dude is doing this. And then of course he tries to explain to me, well, the guy put the wrong address on the thing, and the guy had put the wrong address on the thing, but I had tried to tell him the right address many times. As a matter of fact, I tried to make sure he had the right address. I kept saying Hotel Chrome, kept showing him the thing. And of course the boy who then I had handed 10 rupees to has his head in the window of my cab and won't get out of my cab. He's like, miss, 50 rupees. I'm like, I'm not giving you 50 rupees just to be annoying. Get out of here. What are you doing? So, I just said no, because also I didn't have any small bills to give the kid. So I was like, no. So I was like, well, at least I didn't have 50 rupees worth that I was willing to part with, because of course, when you stay at a hotel here, you have to tip everybody for everything all the time. So I had to have that money, because when you check in is especially when that happens, because inevitably someone walks you up to your room, someone helps you with this, someone does that, and it is very customary to tip if you can at all. So that was super annoying. And then of course when the guy goes to the wrong hotel and then gets all excited because now he's figured out how to take me to the right hotel, because it turns out my voucher didn't have the phone number for the hotel on it, which usually what you would do in that scenario is just call the hotel and have them explain to the cab driver how to get here. Because typically taxi drivers here, kind of like rickshaw drivers in Gujarat, only speak Bengali. They don't speak Hindi or English. Not that I could explain to him where I was going in Hindi, because I can't. So I'm calling I booked through Make My Trip, which is basically the Orbitz or the Hotels.com of India. And so I'm calling Make My Trip, and I'm like, I just need the number to the hotel. And the guy's like, oh, could you give me your name and your reservation number? And I'm reading it out to him. And then he's like, okay, Miss Feather, we just need, so you're saying you have a number for the hotel, you need another number? I was like, no, there's no number on the reservation. I'm yelling at this guy on the phone, even though God bless him, he's just trying to do his job. And the taxi driver is putting on a big show about how this is where the thing said to go. So finally the guy gives me that I have to hang up on him, because he's distracting me and the cab driver and these guys on the side of the road that he's asking for advice are trying to trying to get me to answer questions for them, which of course I have no answers. They're all in the paper. There's an address on the paper. It has a cross street that's really famous. Like, you should be able to find your way there. So finally I hang up on the Make My Trip guy, and the cab driver's like, don't worry, I know where we're going. So then he doesn't know where we're going. So fortunately, the guy from Make My Trip calls me back with the phone number. I get the hotel on with him. The hotel tells him where to go. So then he's like, well, you give me extra money. And I was already planning on giving him like a little bit of extra money. Of course, when I go to get out of the taxi, he's like, 100 rupees. And I'm like, no, I will give you what I have, which I think I had like 80. I was like, I can give you 80 rupees, but that's it. That's all I have. Like, and of course that was all my tip money. So check-in was awful, because then I had to like ask for change, like as I'm checking in. It's very obvious, like, while you're doing that. And I don't understand how people who stay in nice hotels all the time are so good at just keeping like ones on them all the time, because eventually you just run out. And here everybody says change like every 5 minutes. Nobody ever wants to give up their change. So I don't understand how anybody in the city is walking around with oodles of change. It blows my mind. I don't know where that money's coming from. So so that was not a pleasant check-in experience, and I was livid and tired already. I was like, man, Calcutta's the worst. Of course, every time I go to a city for the first time in India, I'm like, oh, this is the worst, because everything's a negotiation, and you just get so tired of like having to yell at people just to do the thing you're already paying them to do. It is, when I first came, one of my friends said, oh, there's nothing like service in India. And I'm like, you're right, there isn't, but not in the way that she meant it. There's nothing like having to like constantly negotiate with people to have them do the thing you're already paying them to do. I have never been anywhere in the world where it is like harder to get people to do the thing that they're supposed to be doing at any given time. And I don't understand it, because all the kids who go to my school who are Indian are at my school in the States, who have come to the States for a master's degree, are like really driven and very intelligent and totally do their homework, and sometimes other people's homework too. So I find it very difficult to understand. Like, I was a little blindsided by that. I did not expect that at all, actually, and it has been hurting me over and over again. But I think it probably has something to do with the caste system, but that is actually very difficult to explain and way above my pay grade. So right now I'm just basically doing a standard kvetch. So that was yesterday, which was not as good as today. So today I took a motorbike ride tour around the city, and it was awesome. Highly recommended if you come to Kolkata, especially if you have a short amount of time, like if you only have like a day and you need to see pretty much everything and you really want to get the feel for the city. It's with a group called Backpackers, and they're run out of like a tiny office where like some backpackers actually like overnight there. Like there's like a tiny room in the back with like several bunk beds, and some people like stay there apparently. There were a couple Europeans there. I took my bike tour. There were two of us on separate bikes. Obviously I was riding with someone. I was not driving the bike in Calcutta my first day here. So we each had a guide, and we went together, and I believe his name was Paulo. He is from Portuguese. He's from Portugal, so he's Portuguese. Right, Portuguese, if you will. And of course I said the only thing in Portuguese I've learned how to say thanks to my niece, which is fala português, and he was like, yes, and then he was like, you, and I was like, no. So fortunately he also spoke English really well. Anyway, so we had a blast today. We went to the Mother House, which has been, for some reason, ever since I was very small, I've been very fascinated by Mother Teresa. I'm not Catholic. I don't understand a lot of what Catholicism does, but I think as a Christian person, as someone who grew up, and I say that, obviously, I've always been very clear that I'm a biblical Christian, not necessarily a social Christian, because I think they're very different for a lot of people, and I think that is very unfortunate. So I'm a Jesus stood in front of the prostitute and said, throw the first stone, take the plank out of your own eye before you go after somebody else's, speck kind of Christian. So I found this beautiful. Going to the Mother House was like, I would think if there was something that would be for me a pilgrimage, this would have been that experience. it was, as I was walking in, one of the nuns was fussing at me about my camera, and then she just put her hands on my cheeks and said, "Oh, God bless you," and I just came in and I saw her tomb, and just the first place that she had for herself and her team, and they're still working there, and I saw her Nobel Prize, and it's in like the crappy cabinets they used in the library when I was a kid going to like Trinity Day School. It like locks with a little key. It's got like a glass door, and I mean, I can't even imagine. I just you're looking at this place and you're like, man, this is beautiful work happens here. And I thought that was so cool, and I got to see the room that she lived and died in. And I know other people have done this and are probably watching and thinking, of course, that's what you do when you go to Calcutta. But this was such an important trip for me, and I was crazy thinking that I was going to leave India without making it here. And I'm so glad that this worked out this week, that I could do this, because I don't think I ever will be the same. I don't think after this point in my life. I don't know what will change, but it doesn't feel the same. So, and that ties back actually into something that happens later in the day. So we did the mother house. We went to, pretty much everything else that anybody ever would want to see here. We had street food for breakfast. We had, we passed like all the ghettos in the area. We went to, everywhere. We saw the racetrack, we saw Victoria Memorial, we saw the Marble Palace. They took us actually all the way out to, if you go just literally right outside of the city in Kolkata, if you go across, there are two big bridges. One of them is believed, that at least the Indians say, it's one of the 7 wonders of the world. So you cross the Ganges twice in this tour, one going out on the new bridge and one coming back on the old. And you just, you can see the correlation and the fervor around the Ganges that these people have, and it's just really startling almost to see, because at one point actually my guide stopped his motorbike and he ran to the water. He's in the caste, his family they're Brahmins, so they're very highly regarded. He ran to the water and he splashed water in his hair and put it all over his arms, and literally right next to, upstream from where he was doing this, was this huge cow carcass that was floating in the water. And when you think of the Ganges, there's this smell wafting off of it of chemicals and pee and dead animal, and yet people just flock to it to get clean, because in Hinduism, Ganga basically laid down as the goddess and gave herself as a river basically to India. So this river is believed to be like a living, breathing goddess that you can touch and immerse yourself in. And I know when people talk about being bathed in the Holy Spirit, or when they think of baptism, it's a very similar thing for Hindus. And so that was just really fascinating to see. We spent a lot of time along the edge of the Ganga. We actually went to a crematorium, and there were 3 bodies just there, and the fires were ready, and they were getting ready the families were there getting ready to watch the bodies be burned right on the edge of the river. And then of course when they're burned, their ashes go into the Ganga, so that's also a part of the river. And we went through this amazing flower market, and of course flowers are also a huge part of the Hindu religion. When you go to visit any temple, certain gods and goddesses have preferences for the kinds of flowers they brought, and so it's a huge part of the worship, as well as if you're having an honored guest or a wedding, typically there's a garland of flowers involved, a very specific one. And so this huge colorful flower market, and there's just stuff everywhere, people everywhere, and then you walk through a spice market to get there, so by the time you get to the flower market you're already sneezing and wheezing, and so that was a crowded, crazy experience. And then, of course, the whole thing opens out through what used to be a women's bathhouse. Now only men bathe there. I didn't get to see the area, obviously, where women bathe because I was with 3 men. And that's one of the things I do like about. It's interesting. I have sort of a love-hate relationship with the way this culture treats women, because obviously they've been very far ahead of us politically as far as women are concerned. But in some ways, there is some, for instance, when I went to the beach in Tarkali, and I talked about this today, women were fully clothed, jeans and t-shirts to go to the beach to swim, and shoes. Some of them were even wearing shoes, and those who even got in the water were wearing, jeans and t-shirts and shoes for the most part. There was one girl who had on a bathing suit, and everyone else was in jeans and t-shirts and shoes. And I was like, and it was awful, because here are these pure untouched beaches, and there may be 50 men, wearing, or, maybe more than that, wearing nothing but their underwear, just running around. Of course, men here just sort of, I've seen a lot of genitalia here from children on up, mostly male genitalia, but when they're babies, you see they run around with no pants on during potty training time, which is an interesting method. My friend Masa and I joke about, why waste all those pants? Why have diapers? Why have pull-ups? Why not just go no pants? Which I'm glad, for the sake of the my future, that's not the case in the States, but man, it's really striking to see on the street. And so yeah, that's been another interesting part of India for me, has been all the anatomy that just comes into every day, and especially male anatomy. Men tend to sort of whip it out and run around naked all the time, and women don't have any freedom in that way. And it's interesting because we think of saris as being quite revealing, and I think I've talked about this before, but of course for Indians it's a lot of coverage, because for us in the States, we think seeing any part of the midriff is very sexual, and here they feel like sort of anything in this area is very sexual. So it's an interesting dichotomy, because you can see an entire back of a woman in the saris that are very hip right now, but that's not considered at all sexy. Whereas if someone wore a backless dress in the States, or a backless shirt, God forbid, we would be all up in arms. So it's a very interesting dichotomy. And because of that, women can't go to the beach. At this beach, you see these 50 to 100 dudes just running around practically naked, and then some of them naked. And then women, 2 women on the whole beach. There were only 2, and they were fully dressed. And I don't wonder why. Why would you want to go to the beach if you had to wear jeans and a t-shirt? That's so uncomfortable. That's not at all practical, especially not in a place where it gets as hot as it does here. And so watching the bathing in the Ganges today, all the places where we were typically gentlemen's dip areas. And so it's just strange, because just all these dudes, flocking to worship, and then they revere goddesses. And I'm going to talk a lot about that when it comes to Kolkata. But men can basically do whatever they want anywhere, and women, because on the other hand, women are so revered that they're kept separate and private to keep them out of danger as much as possible, because men tend to respond a little differently to the female form than we do to theirs. And it's an interesting dichotomy, because in one way I find it very reverent. And for instance, when I come into a building, if there's a security, and there is security now ever since the Mumbai attacks at pretty much any hotel you stay at, where you'll have to be frisked or scanned, and they always take women behind a partition and put you in a private area in case some man thinks it's really hot to watch you get a pat down, which in one hand is so sick, and on the other hand makes you feel so much more protected. It's very strange. But I'd say the big highlight of the day, and I'm using that term more in effect rather than sort of enjoyment. We went to Kali Ghat, which is the huge temple here to the goddess Kali. Now, Kali is half of the goddess Shakti. The other half, I believe, is Gauri. You guys can respond and correct me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. And Gauri is the maternal, loving, nurturing, sweet wife to Shiva, and she sits in his lap when his eyes are open, and dotes on him and loves him. But Kali is what Shakti becomes when Shiva closes his eyes. So in the religious way, Shiva is sort of the earth, and so when the earth is is shunning man, or sort of against his followers. Kali is the form that Shakti takes in order to dance on his chest and wake him up. And she's wild, and she's bloodthirsty, and she kills things, and she protects people from demons. Is sort of her role in the pantheon. And but she's fickle, and she's just wild, right? So we went to Kali's temple. Now, if those of you who watched the video from Champaner that we put, where I went up to the top of the mountain, and you see me cracking coconuts, and you see children getting their head shaved near the lake there, that is Kali's temple up at the top there, and so I have had a very good experience with her in the past. So I went to Kali Ghat today, and Kali Ghat is famed because it is an area in which they actually sacrifice goats to her. Kali's favorite color of flower is red, and apparently she's very, very fond of blood sacrifice. And so we went to the temple, and of course we didn't stay in line for the worship, and I thought that was fine, because as I mentioned, I've had a very good experience standing in line and hanging out with Kali, and I'm good with that. I've had that positive experience. I didn't feel the need to go in, but we went to the goat sacrifice, and you see all these beautiful, trusting, pure black goats, clean, and of course people are loving on them and feeding them treats, and literally feet away, less than 2 feet away, there are maybe 3 or 4 goats, and they just do this all day on the weekends, and maybe all the time, all week long. But I know for a fact they do it on the weekends, because Kali's Day is Saturday, and then some people also visit the temple on Sunday because it's the only day they have off. They lead them in one by one, or actually 2 by 2. If you're really keeping track here, they lead the goats in 2 by 2, and they slaughter them, and it's open to the public to watch this happen. And I didn't know how I was going to handle it. I sort of walked up thinking, this is something I need to see, because obviously in the religion that I grew up with, the reason I stuck with the religion I grew up with is because I am very moved by a religion in which someone needs an apology or recompense from you, something to make it better, something that you've taken away from them in a way that you've hurt them. And instead of taking it from you, instead of taking animal sacrifice and blood sacrifice, the God that I chose to serve gives themselves as that sacrifice. And there are other religions that do that, but I feel that the way that Christ did it to me is the embodiment of sort of how forgiveness has to work in order for life to continue. So I'm here at the temple, and I'm watching these goats be led in 2 at a time. And of course, our guides got us a clutch spot, a front row seat. And the goats are there, and the guy grabs the goat, and he pulls its little arms backwards, and the goat bays, and he slams its head down on the slab. And I turned around and walked away, and I, very American-like, it just went, I'm out. And I just turned around and I walked away, and I couldn't watch it. I just didn't want to have that visual in my head for the rest of my life, because, it's just such an innocent animal. And it was just such a violent scene. And the thing is that everybody's watching, and everybody's reverent to these goats, but also it's just everywhere. There was blood everywhere. And laying on the edge of this area, right outside of where the drain is a dog just laying there. Like, it doesn't sense any danger being where it is. It's not aware of the slaughter that's going on. And that was a little too much life and death in an afternoon for me, because there's life everywhere in Calcutta. And I saw people bathing this morning, and eating and starving and shitting, quite frankly. And then just to have this happen all day, every day. And then everywhere you go in the temple, like as we were leaving, we see the area where they then throw they cut the goat up into little pieces, and they throw all the parts over there for the followers, for the sacrifice. And And there's just, I guess if you worked at a butchery or something, or at a meat processing place, this would not be a big deal. And I understand something my father said to me when I was young. I used to ask why Ashley Moranto got to go hunting and I didn't get to go hunting. And my dad said, because you would shoot an animal. You would learn your lesson. You would think you could do it. You would be dead on. You're smart. You pick things up quickly. You'd shoot the deer. You'd kill it. And then you would ask me to take it to the vet. And I can't handle that experience with you. And at the time, I really thought he was underestimating me. I don't think that's true now. And I can't explain to you just how much this experience made that true for me. And I've been vegetarian for the last year. And as my husband will tell you, I frequently cheat for things like sushi, or like when I was in China, I ate anything I was served, because you should do that when you go to a place like China. But I get it now why I prefer that, because there is something to, Anthony Bourdain says if you can't look an animal in the eye and kill it yourself and have respect for the life that's been given so that you can have this, then you don't deserve to eat the meat. And of course, I frequently find chefs to be a little ridiculous about their craft. But that resonated with me, and today it was just very clear. And then you walk outside the Kalighat, and literally in the same complex of buildings is Mother Teresa's house for the dying, for the sick and dying, where people are treated and loved, where the poor, the poverty-stricken, treated and loved and taken care of, and people sacrifice in order to give them life. They sacrifice what they have in order to give them life. And I don't know that anyone, I hope that nobody's watching at this point, because this is sort of incredibly embarrassing, but to see that contrast so close together, the Indian government gave her that building, and I will never understand why. But I don't talk about my faith a lot anymore. I think Christ leads you to your opportunities, and you love and you give and you do the things that you can do for the people who are ready for them, who the soil has been tilled, and you plant the seeds where you can. But today I was genuinely moved, and there was just such a stark contrast that it was very overwhelming, because it was sort of where we came from and what is necessary and what every religion has had be a part of it since the dawn of time. Sacrifices have been a part, whether animal or human. Tibetan Buddhists have it, Hinduism has it. Everybody pretty much almost has some level of this sacrifice in their history or in their current place. And just that contrast of us sacrificing something innocent and pure versus something innocent and pure making that sacrifice so that we could make mistakes was just very, very overwhelming. It was really overwhelming. Just the poor dead dying on the back of something where people are just killing healthy animals to appease this angry goddess. And my experience here has also given me a lot of respect for sort of the way the Hindus approach a woman, and sort of that knowledge of needing to have in India. I understand why you have to have sort of a Kali within you, because you're constantly fighting here, but I understand now why I've always identified so much more with Gari, with the side that sits and loves. And even when you're dealing with your mate, there's so much, that's a beautiful thing that Hinduism has that I think is lovely. But even when you're dealing with your mate, why you need both, because otherwise there's no joy, and his eyes will be closed and he won't see what he needs to do. And sometimes it's your job to be rough with him and to wake him up, and sometimes it's your job to be gentle with him and to care for him. And I have a lot of great respect for that, but seeing the mortality of the two contrasted just made it again so clear to me why all this, many years ago when I was such a small person, I made the decision that I made. Because it's not that simple, and these things exist in human nature, and they always have. And it was terrifying, quite frankly. I was terrified. And that was an awful-some moment. However you can see it, it was both. And then after that, it was funny because we did so many things after that. And one of the reasons I talked about them before it is because otherwise I don't think I would have been able to get to them, because my brain shut down a little bit after that. I was a little, it took me a while to sort of regain my presence in the situation. And you can't really explain that sort of thing to three strangers on a bike tour. Especially because for them, this is something our guides especially, they see every day and do every day, every single day. So that was really interesting, because their attitude was so cavalier and flippant, but it would have to be if you did that every day. So yeah. We also had real Bengali food, and the other driver actually got in an accident with Paolo on the back of his motorcycle, which was terrifying to watch, but kind of funny too, because everybody was laughing. Except I worry about him because the guy, when we got back, who owns the backpacker place, was did not seem pleased. But it was really interesting. I mean, everybody was okay, so it was fine, but I think during the day today I was like, you know what, I think tomorrow I'll just get one of these guys, like, drive me around, it'll be awesome. And then I remember, and then that really brought it back home to me. Oh yeah, I'm on the back of a motorcycle in India, and like both of them were fine, but let's say one of the guys had cut his foot up pretty bad, and he was fine afterwards. He didn't need even bandages or anything, but it was, it could have been an issue. And I thought, man, what if one of them had just like sprained or broken an ankle or a wrist or something? Like in the States, you'd be like, hey, I got out of that motorcycle accident okay. In India, you'd be like, oh, crap. So I sort of felt that for both of them in that scenario. And it was very sobering to sort of realize, oh, right, I'm on the back of a motorcycle in a foreign country. And everything was very life or death today, so that was a real end cap on the experience. So then I had a lovely dinner, which you'll see some footage of, and that was a much needed sort of respite for the end of the day. And now I'm back in my nice cozy little hotel room, probably just gonna watch a movie and go to bed, and then I will tell you what happens tomorrow. Peace out.